So I think we can move on to the following session of the day, which is session number 6, actually, on hate speech in times of crisis, the digital discourse and real-world consequences. And it's going to go on a global comparative perspective on hate speech. And today's panelists bring in at least perspective for 4 different countries, so Turkey, China, and Latin America. And I'm really happy to introduce you to Elif, who's going to start talking about Turkey, if I'm not mistaken. So Elif, just a brief background on her CV. She graduated from Sambachi University with a degree in cultural studies in 2019 and completed her master's in the same university in 2022. She worked as a researcher at Sambachi University Center for Excellence in Data Analytics, where contributed to research on hate speech detection using digital technologies. She joined the, I will never be able to pronounce this word, Hrant Dink Foundation in 2023, continuing her work in civil society, and she's now the project coordinator leading EU-funded projects on hate speech and discriminatory discourse. She has contributed to the development of PARI, an AI tool that detects hate speech and discriminatory discourse in Turkish and Arabic. And finally, her current work focuses on monitoring, analyzing, and countering harmful speech across digital platforms and other forms of media, with a focus on developing effective strategies to foster a more inclusive discourse.
Hi, everyone. My name is Elif. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for the introduction. I'm from an organization called Hrant Dink Foundation that is based in Istanbul, Turkey. First, I would like to talk a bit about what we do at the foundation, and also then I will present 2 recent cases of crisis where we saw how digital discourse turned into real-world harm. So I'll start with a brief introduction of who we are and what we do. So the Hrant Dink Foundation was established in 2007 after the assassination of Armenian journalist Hrant Dink. We work on areas such as cultural heritage, Turkey-Armenia relations, hate speech and discrimination, minority rights. Hate speech is especially one of a core area for us because Hrant Dink himself was the target of hate speech, and the way to his assassination, he was constantly targeted by far-right groups and media, which then led to his assassination in 2007. So as for our work, the foundation started monitoring hate speech in 2009. And we first started with print media, newspapers. We are still continuing to do that. We are monitoring newspapers for hate speech and discriminatory discourse in newspapers. I know that newspapers sound a bit old, but they are still a major source of information in Turkey. But just know that I'm using the term information very loosely here. But they are still widely read in Turkey. So we are still continuing our monitoring work in print media. And recently in 2021, we also moved on to social media because we know that most of the hateful discourse circulates in digital spheres as well. And now we are including primarily X in our monitoring methodology as well. So I would like to go a bit more into our methodology and then later go on to the cases. So when we're monitoring hate speech, we primarily have 3 basic questions that we ask. The first one is which identity the expression refers to. This one is important to us and it defines our methodology in the sense that we don't categorize any expressions that don't have an identity mentioned as hate speech. This identity can be very obvious, like Armenians, Syrians, Greeks, but it can also be coded. To give an example, we are recently, in the last couple of years, seeing when LGBTQ plus people are targeted, the media or social media accounts don't use the identity expression itself, but they rather use terms like deviants. But we can understand that they are talking about LGBTQ plus people, so we include that in our methodology as well. Then we try to see how this group is being targeted. Are there any aggressive or hostile language? Are there any threats towards them? And then finally, we try to look at what might be the possible consequences of these expressions. And this is where we try to look a bit more into cultural context, because not every expression creates the same effects. For example, in Turkey's case, an expression towards Syrians is much more dangerous and have possible effects than, let's say, an expression towards Colombians. So that's why we try to catch those nuances as well. And one of our primary focuses is to protect freedom of speech, and that's why we have certain limitations. We don't categorize expressions towards individuals, institutions, and the state as hate speech, because we are trying to actively protect freedom of speech in a repressive political climate. That's why we have these limitations to our monitoring work. So here you can see the results of our 10-year monitoring work. We monitor on a daily basis, but we know that the production of hate speech in Turkey is closely tied to political agendas or critical moments like elections or political conflicts. But at the same time, we, over this 10-year work, we realized some patterns that are the same, whether what is going on in Turkey or internationally. So across different years and different political contexts, we saw 6 groups that are continuously being the target of hate speech, and we call these groups the unchanging others. As you can see from the visual, some of the identity expressions are bigger. The bigger you see them here, it means that they are targeted more. So the 6 identities we examined to be targets of hate speech constantly, no matter what the current events are Christians, Armenians, Greeks, Syrians, Jews, and Greek Cypriots. So we always, no matter what is going on in Turkey or internationally, we can always see these groups being targets of hate speech. And more recently, our general methodology focuses more on ethnic, religious, and national identities, but we also include gender identity and sexual orientation as well. The map here doesn't include those identities, but our monitoring work does. And what we can say is that LGBTQ plus people have become a central target of hate speech as well, especially in the last 10 years, visibly. And they are being framed as a threat to family values and the society. So they are the center of hate speech across many platforms as well. And I should also add that Syrians here were added after 2014, the mass migrations because of the Syrian war. And they are one of the groups that are targeted the most. So we can definitely say that new others are being constantly created. So my first case that I will be presenting would be the February 2023 earthquakes. It was it took place on February 6, 2023, and it affected 10 cities and caused immense destruction and loss of life. Following the earthquakes, people were full of anger, especially towards the negligence of the government and desperation of not being able to do anything about the situation. So immediately after the earthquakes, internet restrictions were applied by the government, and people were not able to use social media effectively for gaining information, or even people in the earthquake region for gaining information on where to access aid and shelter. So in that atmosphere, disinformation spread very fast, and in this case, it mainly targeted refugees. It is important that the refugees were targeted in that case, because those 10 cities affected by the earthquake are also cities where there is a huge refugee and migrant population. So we monitored both social media and newspapers and saw that refugees were being labeled as looters or invaders or opportunists. And this was extremely important because what we saw was a digital discourse affecting real life as well. When we looked at other human rights organizations and migration-focused civil society groups' works, we saw that the refugees faced verbal harassment, physical assaults, and forced evictions from the sheltering areas. And thousands of refugees were reportedly pushed out of camps and temporary housing. And the reason behind this was the claim that aid should be prioritized for Turkish citizens. So this became a major problem in the earthquake region. When we monitored hate speech and discriminatory discourse in the newspapers, we looked at, so the earthquake happened at February 6th, and we looked at news from that date until the end of February. And we saw that the majority of the content produced, the hateful content that was produced, was actually produced in local newspapers. So there are national newspapers and local newspapers. And local newspapers, from our observations, they have a way of communicating at a more close range with their readers. And since editorial processes are much less restrictive, they are allowed to use more aggressive language. So that produces more hostility, even more hostility towards refugees. But in that moment of crisis, refugees were not the only group that was being targeted, since it was a situation that required immediate aid and shelter. LGBTQ plus people in the area were also reported to be discriminated against. And the LGBTQ plus rights organizations reported more than 200 cases of discrimination and violence, and many particularly avoided shelters altogether due to fear of assault and discrimination. So this period was definitely one of the cases where we observed how discrimination online and in the media reflected directly to discrimination and violation of rights in the real world. My second case that I will be presenting is again in 2023, and it's the election period. So there was a presidential and parliamentary elections in May 2023, and there were 2 rounds of voting because the majority was not established in the first round. So there were 2 weeks between the first round and the second round. And we monitored X and also newspapers in those 2 weeks to see how the hateful discourse produced by the politicians themselves reflected to the digital atmosphere or the media. So when we looked at X and also newspapers, we saw certain identities being targeted the most. One of them were Armenians, because at the time the opposition candidate was claimed to be Armenian himself. So we saw that a lot of content online produced hate speech towards Armenians and using the identity expression itself as an insult. And we particularly saw phrases such as Armenian seed or Armenian remnant or secretly Armenian, and used the identity expression itself as an insult. Then again, we also saw content towards refugees, especially Syrians and Afghans, who consist the most of the refugee population in Turkey, and they were discriminated against widely, and they were labeled as perverts or looters and deviants. And again, we also saw hateful speech towards LGBTQ plus community as well. They were in some of our data sets, they were the 60%, they were the 60% of targeted identities. So again, in this case, we also saw that local newspapers produced more hateful content compared to national newspapers. Okay, so very briefly, I want to conclude by talking about what our responses to hate speech can be. In Turkey, there is no specific hate speech law. Instead, we have a law called Article 216 called Incitement to Hatred. At the foundation, we do not support introducing any new hate speech laws in this context. In practice, in Turkey, this article is often used not to protect the targeted groups, but rather to persecute journalists, academics, and civil society actors. So in contexts and regimes like Turkey, such laws tend to deepen the repression rather than address the structural discrimination that is already in place. And we know that the majority of the Article 216 incarcerations consists of journalists at the moment. So rather than pushing any sort of law, we are trying to create a rights-based and context-sensitive approach that focus on prevention and media responsibility and cross-sector collaboration. And by looking closely at moments of crisis, we can see how hate speech works as part of a cycle, and the one that turns stereotypes and discrimination into inequality and eventually hate crimes. So we believe that understanding that cycle and talking about that cycle through monitoring work and through monitoring work is the first step in breaking it. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, okay. Thanks also for being attentive to the time. So we're going to collect questions in the end, so we're just going to continue the panel. The next speaker is going to talk about digital legal nationalism, foreign firms, and the regulation of online hate speech in China. Dr. Qingxiu Bu, I'm so sorry if I pronounced it wrongly. He has published in a widely variety of areas of law, many of which are themed around law and global challenges, with a particular focus on the development of legal infrastructures in transnational law and global governance. He has previously been an assistant professor in law at Cardiff, Law School, Cardiff University and School of Law, Queen's University Belfast, during which he taught transnational business law at the Center of Transnational Legal Studies. Georgetown University also as an adjunct professor. He worked as a docent in the Institute of Global Law and Policy, Harvard Law School in January 2013 and January 2014. He now serves as a member of the University of Sussex. So the floor is yours for the next 15 minutes.
Hey, hi, good morning, everyone. So it's my great honor to present my talk on digital legal nationalism. So we bring the issue to business context. Oh, sorry. Yeah. First of all, when I try to discuss the issue, I always ask my question, why do we intervene this question? And how about theoretical or conceptual contribution we can fill the gap? How about the methodologies? What's the general trend in this area? My hypothesis here, online hate speech is increasingly weaponized, promoting stronger regulatory and corporate pressures. So this dynamic is reshaping global governance and norms for cross-border economic activities. So I just pick an example for the conceptual approaches. I'll give you, for instance, we talk about capitalism. Afterwards, we talk about state capitalism. So then in digital era, we have a digital state capitalism. So you can see from the evolving conceptual change, so it makes sense in different circumstances. So first of all, I answer the first question, why do we intervene? We can see like xenophobia, nationalist populism, and especially our current main theme is like hate speech on rise. So online hate speech, they often intensify during geopolitical frictions, confrontations, clashes, capital market clashes, trade war, Cold War, tech war, digital wars, a lot. So, but they're always fueled by state media narrative and amplified on platforms like Weibo, like Douyin, and WeChat. So you can see Weibo is like X, Douyin is like TikTok, WeChat is what we are using like WhatsApp or Facebook. So this is like actually the actors in like a digital platform, as I mentioned, like Weibo, Chat, WeChat, and Douyin. So what are triggers for online hate speech? And I categorize three kinds. The first one is territorial disputes, or sometimes they said geographic listing. So there's to some extent we can say witch hunts, right? Maybe not neutrally, against those foreign brands like Coach, Samsung. So there's always some social outrage. So secondly is, as some other colleague mentioned, human rights issues. So the nationalists, the backlash, boycott, for instance, there's a very, very controversial issue, Xinjiang cotton issues. I know if we talk about human rights, everybody knows this. And many brands have been, we can say, boycott, for instance, like H&M, Nike, Adidas, Puma, and Burberry. So the third category is geopolitical and ideological clash or backlash. For instance, Huawei and TikTok, I think everybody knows the brand. They have been sanctioned, or we can say blocked in certain countries. So China government think, okay, previously we had a so-called century of humiliation. Now it's a new modern version. So they just, to some extent, like justify online hate speech. Like, so they said, yes, it's patriotic defense. So this, to some extent, fueling, we can have nationalist rhetoric. So sometimes they criticize certain values, of course, like a different culture, different values. They said so-called like a new word, like 白左, like what left. Some of you maybe heard of that. So let me share with you some data. Consumer boycotts and their triggers. So we can say like different like categories again. Territorial integrity is a big one. We can say it's about 21 cases. Prejudice, political, ideological disputes, Hong Kong protest, and Xinjiang, like cotton issues. So you can see this like during the last 3 years, there are different numbers. How about by industry? We can say food and beverage, like a designer label, to more extent, they are retailers, right? And let's see how about home nation boycotted. I can see, you can imagine, United States, Japan. The third one, we could say like France. So come back to drivers again. So Western values or government policies or something else, like a boycotts. And boycotts always bring about like the wave of buying domestic brands. Consumers publicly just dump Western goods. They said let's favor Chinese brands. So another one is some very famous singers, like movie stars. They said let's terminate contracts. Otherwise, we would be labeled not patriotic. Number 3, deplatforming. This is interesting. For instance, when H&M and boycotted, they found out their physical stores removed from the Chinese, for instance, like e-commerce platform, like a Baidu. Baidu is like a Google here, and a Taobao. So the question, how to balance free speech and online hate speech is not something new. It is something courts, something lawmakers, something the public that have been debating for ages. So I believe these brands, most of you know very well. We can see sometimes it's a little bit tricky. Let's move to the very left one. So you can Chinese model, and she was eating pizza with chopsticks. Something maybe like a joke, something tricky, but actually it brought about some boycott. They said Chinese culture, Chinese value. Why we use chopstick to eat, pizza? So there are many such kind of cases, and political stances or commentary can jeopardize a brand's future. For instance, CCTV is not like a European here CCTV, it's a China Central TV station, and also Tencent. So they streamed the NBA game in China. They said, let's stop it because they're different points like stance. Another very famous brand is this one, and suffered a lot, suffered 1.7 billion US dollars in 2017 because of this very controversial, the weapon, the military base. So let me share with you some other data. For instance, whether there is very solid evidence to support such a very controversial issue. So actually, no. 72%, you cannot find some evidence support from China government or Beijing or state. And maybe we can say there are some evidences. Yes, to some extent. We can say 3%, they said initiated by a party, by Beijing. But another 25%, they said supported by a party or state-affiliated organs. So what are the consequences for those boycotted brands? And also, you can divide in two. You can say the public apologies. Yeah, 52%. They just apologized, said, and 48% no. So we can say Nike and Adidas. So they got boycotted. What's the consequence? You can see they underperformed. But other brands like a domestic one, step by step, steadily rising. Yeah. So like sneakers, sportswear, and we can say foreign brands sales the dipping in China, but domestic brands growing. Yeah. So this is like a game, right? So China normally follow top-down approaches. Some people said it's a statist approach. We can say 79%. If we just compare China, India, UAE, Saudi, and Indonesia. So the first cause for boycott in China, netizens, we can say in like a network. China wants the world to know about its danger. So be careful, culture, political stance, and so on. So Chinese market said, we don't welcome those malicious backstabbers. So the targeted boycotts focus on visible retailers. But the question come up, how about some big one? Look, these two. One is Lockheed Martin. Yeah, this may be different. They can not easily boycott. So to more extent is some visible retailers. very loud backlash, but also just cause very minimal economic, we can say, impact. So the speech causes harm, indeed. So we can say the percentage agree that in the United States, they said people should be able to make statements, even they're offensive to minority groups publicly. This is 2015, the data. So after 3 years, like 59%, they still believe, they said like hate speech, they can cause offline harm. So does social media catalyze hate crime? Yes. So online hate speech normally is a predictor of online, offline hate crime. So I think I just skip over a little bit because we have a lot of colleagues talk about EU's approach, DSA 2022. They said no hate speech online. And Online Safety Act 2023, United Kingdom, I think they did, interestingly, they do not specify online hate speech. But from the 4 parts at least, they try to address such issues. Also interestingly, 2024 US Human Rights Report actually released in 2025 August. So they criticized this act. They said, this act will risk press freedom by pushing social media to censor content. You can see the conflict, different ideas between United States and the UK. So Germany, and they give very detailed how to address the issue. They said within 24 hours, you have to remove those online hate speech. Otherwise, it will be subject to, like 5 million euros and penalty. So let's compare a little quickly between China and the United States. So we can say from a regulation framework perspective, they focus on safety. From power relation theory, the interest of the power, the party, Beijing government always prevail. But from a social context, equal. So United States, you can see very different. Yeah, we'll just give you a quick example. United States, they said, like from a regulatory framework, they said regulation centered on the principle of freedom. So this is very different between United States and China. So let me share with you some theoretical and jurisprudential foundations. There are 2 theories. One is speech theory, another one is marketplace of idea theory. So from 100 years ago, Supreme Court of the United States, they made such a decision. I just interpret plainly. Society progresses well, so when government does not decide what's true, what's valid, and what's acceptable. So we can see also like a very big difference, not only between United States and China, but between China, United States, and Europe. So European Union follow something conditional liability approach. And we'll see what would happen against the X. I think other colleagues presented. So what happened to X? Today is 15th December, 10 days ago, December 5. And EU hit X with 140 million and US dollars fine. Say it broke hate speech and misinformation rules just 10 days ago. So we can see this like offline consequences. If you do not well online, you will be subject to very, very painful penalty, 140 million US dollars, like December the 5th, just 10 days ago. So let's see, very quickly move to China's. China's got very, we can say, like not arguably, it's the strictest ever law against online hate speech. Probably it's a different perspective, you can see. So like 2023, during the last 3 years, so we can see, especially like this one, number 4. They said in the future, if you want to access internet, you must have your digital ID. Whenever or wherever you access internet, you must ensure digital ID. So like no secrecy, no privacy. And so China's combat against online hate speech. So as I said, EU follows conditional liability, but China follows strict liability. You got lawyers here, strict liability, how CB, right? So especially criminal law, Article 249, and you would be subject to criminal liability if you do not well, we can say, in terms of online speech. So let's see China's regulatory dynamics. It's selective enforcement. China has strict law against online, we can say, free speech, but they're rarely used in court. And I just checked the China judgment online. To my great surprise, only 2 judgments, 2 court rulings in this regard, but the 2 rulings from the same case. So I think this is what we can see the green color. We like the green, we don't like the red, right? Red means danger, risk. So what that means, just very quickly, if online platform, they have robust oversight. So you can see that could be exempted from regulation. And we can see on the right opposite here, if there's no oversight online platform, there must be have like highly restricted regulation. This interprets very well China approach, EU approach, and NRC approach. And very quickly, we can say the higher degree robust oversight industry platform pay, the less restrictive regulation should be. How about corporations deal with this online hate speech? Let's see about, as everybody knows, during the last 2 years, there were some tragedies against the Japanese. I believe you read from the website. So that's why Tencent and Weibo, Xinlang, they strongly against online speech because it, we can say, influence social stability. Oh, also like some data, we can say Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, you can Twitter did not do very well. And X, that's why, to some extent, they were fined just like 10 days ago. So, like just questions before I move to my conclusion. Should Western companies stand by their own values or they risk access to Chinese market? Or we can say, for instance, H&M sells nearly 95% of clothes outside China, but China's growing wealth still drives the big share of its future growth. So Western corporations between rock and hard place, either or. One, they can uphold home country values, or they adapt to China's red line. So you can say one after another, they left China. Very famous Google. What's Google's motto? Previously said, don't be evils. What's now? Do the right thing. So 2012, they withdrew from China. 2022, completely they withdrew from China. You can see this is what Google do. So now digital dilemmas, hate speech, they occurred on their platforms. Companies subject to legally required to moderate. So my conclusion, nationalist narrative fuels China's global rise. The stake going beyond online speech to digital governance, artificial intelligence, and cross-border trade. So social media, they must rebalance such plate powers, especially for those like a behemoth. They're really powerful. So we just care about the ESG-driven practice. They often offer us a path to legitimacy and to trust. So Western response is they should prioritize fairness, transparency, ethical, and security. So very last one, don't forget education. Thank you very much for your attention.
We're going to move on to the last speaker of this panel, which is going to be Luz. And Luz is going to be speaking about violence against women in politics and digital expressions, lessons from Mexico electoral law.
Thank you so much, Juliana. I'm truly delighted to be here. And I'm afraid that as the morning has advanced, we're getting a lot of insights on how this is getting worse and worse. And the legal solutions that are out there are definitely not satisfying. So I'm not actually a bearer of good news. And but I would like, anyways, to share the Mexican case to you, because I think it will bring good insights on how we should not address this problem. So first, a bit of a route map. I would like to provide an outline of what the Mexican framework on violence against women in politics is looking and how it has been applied by electoral courts. Secondly, I would like to address my main claim, And my main claim is that recent practice shows that this framework is being weaponized by powerful actors to silence protected political speech by private citizens, journalists, and human rights defenders, particularly on the internet. So very close to what Elif was mentioning that is actually happening in Turkey. And to prove my point, I would like to share with you 3 high-profile cases. And my tentative conclusion is that we definitely need a doctrinal recalibration that interrogates the broad definition that we have currently under Mexican law about what violence against women in politics mean, and how we should establish higher standards on motives, forms, and impact. And again, why do I think this matters? Because I think the Mexican case could contribute to a global debate on how to address online misogyny without censoring legitimate public debate. Thank you. So I want to begin with a caveat. Nothing in this research should be read as suggesting that technology-facilitated gender-based violence directed at politicians is not serious, or that women should absorb the cost of doing politics. Empirical evidence is decisive. Women in politics face distinctively and often coordinated online attacks, including rape threats, doxing, sexualized rumors, and deepfakes. I take all of these super seriously. And I am quite aware that usually appeals to freedom of expression have functioned to shield the speech of powerful white men at the detriment of the voices of those who are already structurally silenced. But this pattern is not at stake here. As we will see through the 3 high-profile cases that I just mentioned, and that I will try to discuss very briefly in the interest of time, they are not about powerful white men, but about private citizens and journalists that are being sanctioned for interrogating nepotism, corruption, and judicial integrity. And I want to add that to turn a blind eye on the weaponization of this framework would do a disservice to feminist movements and will actually undermine the legitimacy of the gender equality agenda. So I will give you well, these are good news. Mexico currently leads women's descriptive representations. Like after 30 years of gender quotas, we have reached full parity in the 3 levels of government: federal, state, and municipal, across the 3 branches. So in the last general elections, Mexico elected a woman as a president for the first time in history. And we have reached full parity in both the Chamber of Deputies and the Senate. And now women hold 13 of the 32 state governorships. And all state legislatures are at or above parity. So against this backdrop, one could ask, well, whether this political reconfiguration is a catalyst of more violence against women in politics, or is actually inhibiting this kind of violence. And unfortunately, what we are looking at is that the more that women are in power, the more that they are targeted, which makes this a really difficult problem to tackle. So, thank you. So there are 2 scholars that have been very influential in the literature about violence against women in politics, and this is Krupp and Restrepo. And they say that actually violence against women in politics is a form of backlash, a resistance to women's political participation because they are women and because they are in politics. So in other words, women are victims of their own success. So under Mexican law, violence against women in politics is conceived as a hate crime where perpetrators seek to punish women who are transgressing the gender roles that they must perform. And even attacks that are not motivated by gender but use gender means become violence against women in politics because they discourage women from participating in politics. So under this view, and this is what I want to stress here, is that violence, according to the Mexican legal framework and according to international human rights law, takes multiple forms. So it's not only the most extreme ones, the physical ones or the sexual ones, but it also covers psychological ones, economic, verbal, symbolic attacks. And so it's a continuum from the most subtle to the most extreme, which is feminicide or femicide. And the problem is that when the law picks up this really broad definition, it is not as easy. Yeah, thank you. Thanks. To keep it under control, and please bear with me a bit. So what happened in Mexico in 2020? There was this huge, big reform that was alongside these really strong quotas to get women in power. And at the same time, we amended 8 federal laws. So there were electoral, administrative, and criminal mechanisms to address violence against women in politics. And we have a national registry of public offenders, and we have this expansive definition. And I know not everybody is a lawyer, but I think I would like to take some time and explain why this definition is I think, too broad. It says any action or omission, including acquiescence, that means tolerance, based on gender. So violence against women in politics is any action or omission based on gender occurring in public or private life, offline or online, that has the purpose of or result of impairing women's political and electoral rights or their full exercise of public office and decision-making. So everything, basically. And so in order to explain to the citizens what would this mean, what the law does is that there's an article that has 22 example behaviors of what, I know it's weird, but that's what we did. 22 example behaviors of what would this look in the actual world. So these go from spreading false or private information using gender stereotypes to degrade a woman candidate, obstructing women candidates from performing their duties, coercing them to resign, or make decisions against their will. And I want to stress the first one, spreading false or private information using gender stereotypes to degrade a woman candidate. And that looks amazing when we read it, but it is really hard to put in practice. So sanctions range, and this was an element that was actually praised by the international community. Sanctions range in severity. We have content removal, public apologies, mandatory training, fines, disciplinary measures, annulment of elections, and criminal penalties that go all the way to 6 years of prison. So this was praised by international community because it didn't rely only on criminal law, which we know is the most stringent hand of the law, but it also was supposed to create a cultural change. So a public apology, which sounds, reasonable. And as of July of 2025, there were 514 entries in this national registry of public offenders, and there were 469 individuals, which 384 were men, 85 were women. And we could see that there's an intersectional layer, I would say, because 25% of the women that were attacked were Black or pertain to indigenous communities. No? So we can see that there's a disproportionate impact there. So I would say that in the first period of this law, and this is pretty recent, we're talking about 2020, the Electoral Federal Court actually stick to inter-American standards, the international human rights law, and the court emphasized that the default in political debate is to protect harsh speech, and that insidious, offensive, or aggressive criticism is not necessarily violence against women in politics. So it was a much more, I'm running out of, okay. So, and what I liked the most, and that's why I think that the Federal Electoral Court was doing a good job, it was also always making what we call a comparator analysis. And what does this mean? To ask whether the same would happen if a man was involved. Because if the answer is no, then the intent is not gendered. You see, oh, excellent. Okay, so I have, and I don't have enough time, but I'm just going to maybe just stick to the first case. So we have a private citizen. Actually, she was a housewife, and she had a Twitter account of 6,000 people. That in Mexico is not very popular. I know it sounds a lot, but in Mexico, 140 million people, and 6,000 in an X account is not that much. So her tweet is the following. X, who is the president of the Chamber of Deputies, she says, X must have thrown such a tantrum to get his wife included that they had to wreck the electoral slates to give her a candidacy. So she is interrogating the way that the electoral formulas were created. And of course, she's saying, well, she's criticizing that the president of the Chamber of Deputies was trying to introduce his wife as a candidate, okay? So the ruling, so the candidate went to the electoral authorities and said, this woman, this private citizen, this housewife that has 6,000 followers, committed violence against me, gender-based violence against me. And actually, the court said, yes, that's true. Symbolic violence, that tweet did invisibilize your professional trajectory and your capacities by presenting you as merely the wife of a powerful man. And the ruling goes on describing structural patriarchy. And actually, the private citizen was fined, had to do some mandatory training, got an inscription in the registry, and she had to pin in her X account a public apology to this person. So what is actually a critique about nepotism, and if we do the comparator analysis, the same would have happened if it had been the other way around. She was denouncing the family ties between the president of the Chamber of Deputies and the candidate. I think it was not violence against women. And very quickly, just to prove my point, the other two are about journalists. There was this journalist that was investigating the links between organized crime and public officials. So he included the family ties of Tania Contreras, which is a judicial candidate to the state Supreme Court. And again, the court said, like, okay, so you're criticizing and you're exposing these ties with organized crime. So remove the column. It was an online newspaper. Remove the column, public apology, and inscription in the registry. And the third case is about Judge Silvia Delgado. And there were a human rights defender and 14 media outlets exposed that this judge was the former lawyer of the drug lord Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. So they said they considered their judicial candidacy, back then she was a candidate, they considered her as high risk for judicial integrity. So again, we have two examples on a journalist basically doing his job, denouncing corruption, and the other one is, I think, a legitimate critique of judicial integrity and danger that it would raise if you have a lawyer, a judge that formerly was the lawyer of a drug lord. So can you? Yes, very quickly. So nearly, and this is part of a larger trend. Can you? Yes, it didn't work. Okay. So we can see a bunch of worrying effects here, and I would just like to say that I think these three cases really showcase how this instrument has been weaponized, because actually the framework seems to bite more against critics of those in power than against powerful perpetrators that are degrading women politicians. So this is used against private citizens and journalists instead of powerful men that are degrading women or keeping women away from politics. So I would say, and I have more questions, unfortunately, than answers, that we need to rethink this really broad concept of violence that reads really well on paper, but it's really difficult for courts to apply. We are seeing an inflated use of the term of symbolic violence and a misapplication, because the courts are no longer doing the comparator analysis that I mentioned, and they are actually departing from inter-American standards. Yes. Before Juliana kills me, thank you. And yeah, hopefully we can discuss this later. Thank you.
I wouldn't kill anyone. I'm not sure the organizers would kill me, maybe. Do we have time for 1 or 2 questions, or do we need to wrap up?
Just 3 minutes.
3 minutes. So 1 or 2 questions. Does anyone have any questions? 1, 2. Yeah. Oh. So maybe we can start with this one.
I have a question about these AI images that are currently being spread. And for now, we can tell that they're AI, and a lot of people that can actually tell that they are cartoonish. But speaking from experience, on Instagram or TikTok, I can see more and more videos that I confuse with real videos. And what can we expect in the future for these videos? And will people believe them more? And will this cause more chaos in the future? And are there going to be laws for AI, maybe? And what can we expect from these laws?
And gotten another question?
Okay.
Forward. Who is the question?
Thank you. I have the question for all the speakers. It's a like open questions, and I maybe if you cannot answer it, I just want to hear your takes on this because I know from the sessions is hate is fueled by one of the main fuel of the hate is disagreement from people beliefs. So I want to hear your takes on how can we convey our interest or disagreement towards maybe another groups without being violent, without being hateful. That's it. Thank you.
I'll tackle the AI one first. I don't have anything positive to say other than it's getting worse. So those images were pulled from 2024, and we're going into 2026, and Sora 2 and Nano Banana are making it incredibly difficult to parse. And that's just still content as well. The videos are really difficult. There are some spots that you can spot it, but those are increasingly being fed out of the models. So what myself and some of my colleagues who are working in this space have talked about is it's very much like there's no going back to a time before these images were being shared. But what we're looking at is the regulation of like making sure that everything is watermarked, that cannot be removed, that cannot be cropped, in the same way that like you've got sort of like a manuscript across the whole thing when you submit a paper. But even so, that's not going to be popular with people who are creating these images because it ruins the feel. And there's existing legislation within the UK and the EU. So the EU has an AI Act, but a lot of that is levied at companies per se and platform developers. So I do work on AI chatbots and AI girlfriends, and a lot of their work, their monetization of this content would fall under the AI Act because they are developing it. It's not clear how much this is going to impact individual users. Additionally, a lot of the legislative frameworks that we have aren't looking at alt tech platforms. So my colleague, Ashton Kingdon, she's looking at alt tech spaces like Getter and what's the other one? There's a few more that she looks at who are designing their own LLMs to create content. So if you've got individual users who are doing this on their own, who are creating this content, there is a really slow response from the regulatory side. In the UK, the Online Safety Act doesn't talk about AI at all. And Ofcom is very much panicking because there's not much we can do. Whereas our government is basically wanting it in everything. So the researchers now are at a crossroads between that and trying to be like, please don't put it in everything so we can start trying to fact check, but it's getting increasingly difficult. I'm sorry that wasn't positive.
Thank you, Alisa. Can we try an attempt at answering in one sentence the last question that we had? Any takers for the question?
I would maybe start by using proper definitions. I know in some countries' context, hate speech, they don't want it to be called hate speech because hate speech often connotates some legal consequences. But in other contexts, I think calling even hate speech as hate speech brings a lot of awareness into it. That would be my very short answer.
Okay, I think we will need to wrap up, but I'm sure we can continue the conversation over lunch. Let's give a wonderful round of applause for this wonderful panel, which was fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone.